Hey, I just want to warn you, this is real talk today. I wish I could make this funny. I wish I could make it super hilarious, engaging, and I'll do everything I can to make it easy, but we're talking about an idea that's really difficult. And I got to be honest with you, I can't imagine a better person in Scripture to speak to it than Jesus and my favorite disciple, Peter. Peter is hands down all day long my favorite disciple. He's the guy that I look to, the guy I identify with most. I didn't used to think it was okay to say that you had a favorite disciple, but I always have a favorite disciple in Peter because Peter is always running off at the mouth when he should be thinking, and I can totally identify with that. Peter is always the one rushing in when he should be watching. I can totally identify with that. And Peter is always the one with the best questions. Now, I'm not sure that he has the best questions, but he's the one who asks the best questions. Because everybody else probably hears Jesus teach and goes, huh? But Peter goes, huh? Out loud, right? Everybody else has the questions in their mind, they're burning back there, but Peter has the guts to say them, to ask questions that don't seem appropriate, that seem like they question Jesus. He's the one who says, hey, I want to do this or I want to do that. And I love that about Peter because I can identify. Like, I don't have a filter, right? I tell people all the time, I'm blunt. That's just the way God rolled me. And I love that about Peter because Peter jumps in whenever he's holding back. Now, Matthew chapter 18 is one of these times where Jesus talks about a really difficult subject, a subject that every one of us deal with at some level, somehow in our lives. And sometimes it's a pretty sensitive place that you and I, when somebody gets there with us, they're like, we put our arms up and they're like, hey, let me stop you right there. We don't need to talk about this because it's making me angry, right? Jesus talks about some stuff that's really hard for us to deal with sometimes. In fact, in Matthew chapter 18, he tells us how it is that you and I, regular everyday people, can navigate difficult relationships. When someone does something or is doing something that hurts us or hurts other people. And in Matthew 18, he kind of unpacks that for the first half of the verse. He unpacks how regular everyday people like us can live at peace with other people when they do something that hurts us, when they do something that's sinful, whatever. And now listen, if you have a relationship in your life where you're like at tension with someone else, then Matthew 18 is where you need to spend a little time. Because it tells us how to live those things out, what the process is for restoring relationships with people. Now, that's a talk for another day, so we're not going to get into that one. But let's say that what happens over those verses is that Jesus teaches these people, these disciples, handful of people around him, he teaches them how to navigate these difficult things. And here's the deal. It always involves insult, doesn't it? I mean, you've had relationships like that where difficult things happen and there's tension and there's insult. They've hurt you in some way or another, right? Now, all the other disciples hear what Jesus is saying and they're like, okay, I get it. We got to live with people. But Peter, I love him because he chimes up with the question that probably everybody in the group is asking. He's like, he just wants to know, listen, I got this question. You're telling me when people hurt me that I should do something to work out with them. And then he asks a question. And my guess is, and I don't know this for sure, but my guess is that Peter has got a real question because he's got a real situation in mind. Here's the question that he asks. He says, Peter came to him and asked, Lord, how often should I forgive someone who sins against me? 7 times? Now listen, I'm guessing about anything, right? That Peter's got somebody specific in mind. He's like, Matthew is getting on my last nerve, bro. Like, how many times do I got to deal with this guy? How many times do I got to do I got to forgive that person? And we can just admit that the hardest word in this whole thing is not how many times. It's forgive. Forgiveness. Man, that's tough stuff, isn't it? And I told you when we started that this was real talk. And this is going to get real all up in our personal business, right? Like it's going to get all into our lives because we all have had somebody sin against us, hurt us, say something, betray us, harm us in some way or another, right? Some of those hurts are superficial, like words, right? Some of those are deep, painful, betrayals in our lives. And what Jesus is addressing to them is something so significant and how important. He wants us, regular people who walk with Jesus, he wants us to have right relationships with people, even the people who harm us. And Peter goes like, look, I've got it in mind, right? How many times do I got to forgive a brother, right? How many times? Like 7? My guess is that Peter's like, I'll give you 7 times because I've already done it 6. He's like, I'm going to give him one more shot. Is 7 good? He's hoping that Jesus will respond with, yeah, man, 7 is the perfect number. 7's the right number, Peter. Good job. Way to go. But that's not what Jesus says. You ever do that, by the way? You ever go to God with a question and then give him the answer? That's what Peter's doing. He's like, Jesus, how many times do I got to do this? 7? 7 will work for you? Well, 7? Can we negotiate and land on 7 times? Because I know that's the perfect number. You ever do that? You go to God, ask him a question, and then give him the answer that you're willing to sacrifice? But Jesus kind of says, no, that's not how this is going to work, Peter. And Jesus' response, you might be familiar with it. He says, no, not 7 times, Peter. But he goes, but 70 times 7. That's now, for those of you who are like, okay, let's just set the bar where the bar is. I got 490 times. That's what I got to come up with. 70 times 7 is 490. So I was at 6. I got 480, 4 more times that I got to forgive a person. What Jesus is saying is not just 490 times. He's saying perfection, that's the number, times perfection, right? Infinity times infinity. What he's saying is that if we're going to be followers of Jesus, people who've been given forgiveness, then we have to be the kinds of people who give away forgiveness. I told you this was going to be hard, right? I told you this is going to be a difficult, hard, real conversation. Jesus wasn't setting Peter the bar of forgiveness. He was giving him a pathway to freedom. You see, forgiveness isn't something that Jesus wants from you. Forgiveness for people isn't something he's expecting of you. He's not setting the bar of forgiveness. Forgiveness is something that Jesus wants for you. You forgiving other people is what Jesus wants for your life, not from your life. He's helping them say, hey, listen, Peter, you're living in slavery to this unforgiving spirit. You're living in slavery to the bitterness. You're living in slavery to the vindication that you hope one day will come out, or the karma that you think exists, that you hope gets repaid to that person. And you are living in that, and you're holding yourself hostage. Jesus is saying, listen, he's not saying here's the bar of forgiveness, it's 490 times. He's saying, Peter, I want you to become a forgiving person because I want that for your life. Now listen, if we're going to talk about real forgiveness, we have to talk about what forgiveness is and what forgiveness is not. Because I know right now when I talk about forgiving someone who's betrayed you, forgiving someone who's done real harm to you, it is immediately difficult for you to get. Now listen, before Sheila and I moved here, I had a difficult circumstance, very, very painful for me personally. And it was real life stuff. Now, I know that over the last, 15 years of being the pastor here at Journey, that I've had opportunities to hear lots of people's hurt stories. And a lot of times it's been church hurt. That's the phrase we have now, church hurt. Seems terrible, right? But I got to be honest with you, in ministry, it's real in my life too. For a decade, almost a decade, Sheila and I served at a church that we were at in Ohio, and it was in every way a really difficult staff setup. It was in so many ways cancerous, right? It was in so many ways backbiting and rumors and talking about people and all this stuff and like just kind of conniving and all this stuff. It was really, 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 really hard for us. Eventually we decided, hey, it's time for us to take our ball and go play with some other kids. And we decided to pull out of that. But eventually it got so bad there in that kind of situation that the leadership actually had to hire an outside firm called Peacemakers. peacemakers, a whole outside group had to come in and coach through restoration to kind of find healing for that, because it had churned out so many staff people that had been a part of it for so many years. And they had to bring them back in, pay for flights, pay for trips, pay for hotels, and again, spend time working through this really difficult, tumultuous, finding some healing in it. And I remember when I sat down with the therapist that helped coach through some of it, he said, Jeremy, where do you think the problem comes from? And I said, man, I just got to be honest with you. After almost a decade of this, and this is kind of gross, but I said, I feel like there's a 5-gallon bucket right here. And for the last 10 years, we've all been peeing in the bucket. And my hand is in the bucket. And I don't know whose pee is touching my hand. But what I want to do is take my hand out and wash it and go away, right? Because these people have hurt me in so many ways that I don't know whose fault it is anymore. I don't know if it's their fault or his fault. I don't know if it's my fault. I just want to be done with it. And I want you to get something. That is not the heart that goes, I want to restore and forgive. That's the heart that just says, I just want out, right? And if you've ever been hurt deeply, badly, betrayal, pain like that, I totally and completely feel what you're feeling. I mean, I don't know exactly how you feel. I don't want to tell you how to feel, but I do just tell you I understand it, at least a little. Because it was deeply painful for me, and I just wanted out of it. I didn't want to do any of the hard work. It wasn't a desire to be forgiving, because I felt like forgiveness was going to require me to just sign off on their behavior, right? If I felt like if I forgive them, then they're going to get away without a consequence. Or I felt like if I forgive them, then they're gonna wind up having to, like I'm going to be in some ways endorsing. And that's important to us. We have to discuss something. Here's what forgiveness is not. Forgiveness is not forgetting. Forgiveness is not condoning. And forgiveness is not perpetuating injustice. That is not what forgiveness is. And since sometimes, this is important, since sometimes unsafe or impossible, forgiveness is not always involve reconciliation. Figuring out how to forgive someone doesn't mean I have to have a relationship with them. It doesn't mean that I have to forget what they've done. It doesn't mean I have to sign off or condone what they've done. And it doesn't mean that I'm perpetuating their injustice. I don't have to say it's okay or pass over it. I just simply have to release them from a penalty that's only hurting me. And that's really leads us to what forgiveness is. Forgiveness is, and this is such an important word, forgiveness is a decision. Because you know that nobody can force you to forgive, right? You can't be expected to forgive and forgive someone. You can't be demanded to forgive and forgive someone. Forgiveness is a decision on your part, on my part. It's a decision to do something specific, to give up the right. This is so hard, so real in my life, that we have forgiving is my decision to give up the right for vengeance, for retribution, and negative thoughts. Now let's stop there for a second. I'm going to give up the right for vengeance, retribution, and negative thoughts on somebody else. Now, you have the right if you're going to be unforgiving. You get to hold the vengeance and the negative thoughts. You get to do that, right? If you choose to not forgive, then you are in control. But can we just say this? Your right for vengeance, your right for negative thoughts, those things aren't hurting people as badly as you think they are. Now, granted, I'm driving down the road in my most unforgiving moments. I've got all the negative thoughts in control, right? I've got all the vengeance lined out. I never really wanted bad things to happen to them. I just wouldn't have been disappointed if they did, right? I would have felt like there was some kind of justification. But when I choose to give up my right for vengeance, retribution, and negative thoughts, and I trust God with it, so much better. And in order of doing those things, it frees me up from anger and resentment. You know what's crazy about unforgiveness and bitterness? Is that even when that person wasn't in my life, by the time we dealt with all this stuff, I was already living here in Tennessee. And that stuff was just there. That person's not in my life. but yet I'm carrying with them every day, right? They're no longer a part of my daily life, but I'm living every single day in the bitterness and the resentment and the anger. Even though they're not physically a part of my life, I'm driving down the road with them because I'm lecturing them in the car. I'm going through, and I've got these words picked out, and I've got the rhythm and the proof and everything I need. And even though they're 500 miles away, they're sitting right next to me every moment of every day. And it's like the saying goes, and this is a famous saying, but holding on to unforgiveness is like drinking poison and expecting someone else to get sick. It hurts you a lot more than it hurts them. In fact, they don't even know. I mean, that's the reality of it, right? That they don't even know that you're hurting them. You're hurting yourself to hurt them, and they don't even know that you're upset. Or they might know that you're upset, but they don't care. It's like drinking poison and expecting someone else to get sick. It's ridiculous. And that's what Jesus is really addressing. Jesus isn't saying, I expect you to forgive, Peter. And 490 times is the bar of forgiveness. He's saying, Peter, you've got to understand something. You're in a prison all on your own. And you forgiving someone else is an act of freeing yourself. That's what Jesus does. He tells one of the parables, and parables are that thing, aren't they? Parables are the not so insulting or difficult way to tell a story that kind of lets the guards down, right? So that something difficult can come into the story. He says it this way. He says, the kingdom of heaven, and that is the key phrase, I think, in lots of the parables. He's saying, in the kingdom where God is the king, in the world where God is the head of things, that's what the kingdom of heaven is. In the kingdom of heaven, it can be compared to a king who decided to bring up his accounts up to date with servants who had borrowed money from him. So a bunch of people had borrowed. He's like, hey, just imagine it like this. In the kingdom where God is the king, it's like the king who decides, you know what, I got to settle all my accounts. So he brings them all in and he kind of lines them all up. And he says to him, like, hey, here's the deal. There's something, these got to be settled. And so he calls in one of them. Look at this next verse. He says, one of his debtors was brought in who owed him millions of dollars, right? One of his servants, he owes him a whole ton. He says, but he couldn't pay. So his master ordered that he be sold, along with his wife and his children and everything he owned, to pay the debt. I mean, you get it. Like, he owes everything. It would demand his life, his wife's life, his kid's life, and everything he owns, all to settle the debt. But the man fell down before his master and begged him, please be patient with me. Can you just give me some time? Can you be patient with me? And I'll pay it all. I'll give you everything. Now listen, here's the reality. This is a story that Jesus was telling to kind of gently enter into a really difficult circumstance. Forgiveness, not something any of us like to talk about, especially when it's somebody else. And so he tells this story like, hey, there's this man who owed more than he could ever have, and there was a man who demanded it all. But then he asks for mercy. He says, I'll pay it all. The master was filled with pity for him, and his response was he released him. He didn't just say, I'll be patient with you. He didn't just say, hey, don't worry about it, get it to me when you can. He didn't set a lenient schedule of repayment. He forgave his debt. Now that's the crazy part. Now, hold on to 1 second. Hold on to that idea. Remember, we're talking about real things, but just take a second. Are you familiar with the idea of a bypass? Like here in town, in Jackson, we have a bypass. We have Highland Avenue, which is kind of the business route, which I guess at one point was really pretty congested, where all the businesses were and stuff, right? And then they build a bypass that is kind of like the bypass route. So you have the business route, which is where all the businesses are, and to bypass that, they have an area that has more lanes and wider things and limited numbers of stoplights and that kind of stuff. Now, I don't know that the bypass in Jackson actually bypasses anything, but that was the idea, right? They were going to build this bypass because there's one way that takes all the tension and another way that bypasses all that stuff. That's exactly what a parable does, by the way. Forgiveness, or the idea of forgiving people, is pretty hard stuff to talk about. I mean, I'm guessing that if you and I sat down and I said these exact words about your situation, that it would be pretty hard for you to hear. But Jesus, instead of like going face to face and one-on-one with Peter and dealing with it, he tells him a story. And he uses this part of it to bypass Peter's defenses, to get him to let his guard down a little bit. And here's Jesus' bypass move. His bypass move is we don't all like forgiveness, but we all like to be forgiven. Like Peter was like, hey, how many times I got to do this, man? 7 times? And Jesus is like, no, 70 times 7. He's like, 490? Are you kidding me? Like, that's so much forgiveness. I can't do that. We don't all like forgiveness, but we all like being forgiven. And so Jesus tells the story. He's like, hey, calm down, Peter, right? The kingdom of heaven is like this. It's like a king who's owed millions from a servant. And he calls the servant in, and he demands the payment, but the man can't pay. And so instead of demanding the payment and selling everything, he forgives him. And everybody goes, oh, that's so good. Peter's thinking, man, I love that for me, right? I love to be forgiven. Don't you love to be forgiven? My guess is whatever bitterness or anger or resentment or pain that you're going through, if you stop thinking about that for a minute, you love it when people forgive you of your betrayal. You love it when God forgives. You love verses like Romans 5:8, that God demonstrated his love for us and that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. I love that verse. I love those verses. I love the Romans chapter, or I'm going to say that again. I love Philippians chapter 2, where he says that God completes everything he starts. I love for the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ. I love the forgiveness part, don't you? Everybody hates the idea of forgiving other people, right? But everybody likes to be forgiven. It is what Jesus does to bypass our defenses. He brings up forgiveness in terms of what we've been forgiven. Then he sneaks in the left hook. You familiar with the left hook, by the way? I mean, the left hook is a boxing term. It's where the fighter keeps somebody so busy with the body blows and the body and the work with his dominant hand that he's not really paying attention to his non-dominant hand. And he comes around and sneaks it in. And that's exactly what Jesus does in that next verse. He says this, but when the man left the king, he went to a fellow servant who owed him a few $1,000s, right? He owed millions, was forgiven all of it. He owes a few $1,000s, nothing by comparison. He grabbed him by the throat and demanded his instant payment. His fellow servant fell down before him and begged for a little time. Sound familiar, right? Just beg for a little bit of mercy, a little bit of time. Be patient with me. Be patient with me and I will repay it, he pleaded. But his creditor wouldn't wait. He had the man arrested and put in prison until the debt could be paid in full. And so what's crazy about it is that Jesus is contrasting. Now remember what Jesus is doing. Jesus is not telling a story that really happened. He's telling a story about the kingdom of heaven. He's saying in the kingdom of heaven where God is king, in the kingdom where God rules, where God makes the choices, where God's life, the life that's in the king, when that life is the life that runs things, in the kingdom where God is king, there is a pretty crazy thing that happened. Jesus is not telling a story that really happened. Jesus is telling a story about the kingdom of heaven. And the kingdom of heaven, or the kingdom where God is king, is one where forgiven people forgive people. I told you it was hard talk today. I told you it was going to be difficult today in our conversation, that forgiven people forgive people. If you are a follower of Jesus who has been forgiven of millions, it falls to you not to respond in obedience with forgiving, but to forgive out of a heart that has been forgiven. Goes on, just a couple more verses. When some of the other servants saw this, they were very upset. He says they went to the king and they told him everything that had happened. And the king called the man in and forgiven him and said, "You evil servant." Do you see how the person who is forgiven but doesn't forgive is viewed? "You evil servant, forgive. I forgave you that tremendous debt because you pleaded with me. Shouldn't you have mercy on your fellow servant just as you had mercy on you?" And the angry king sent the man to prison to be tortured until he had paid his entire debt. Now, I got to be honest with you, this is the tense moment. When you first read this, you're like, oh, wow, that got heavy-handed all of a sudden, didn't it? And almost, if you think about it, it feels a little like it's the opposite. Like, shouldn't the king, who's been forgiven much, shouldn't he also be forgiven? But remember, what Jesus is doing is not telling a story that actually happened. He's illustrating a point that there is a kingdom where God is king. And the kingdom where God is king, in the kingdom of heaven, people who are forgiven much are people who forgive people. Forgiven people forgive people. And what Jesus is doing is telling of that story. What Jesus isn't doing is threatening a punishment. He's not saying, hey, if you don't do this, that God's going to be angry with you and he's going to exact payment or judgment on you. He does go on to say that there is an expectation of us. But he's not making that a threatening as a punishment. In fact, let's put it this way. Jesus isn't threatening a punishment. He's describing a reality. He's describing a true reality in our everyday lives. That if you and I are forgiven much, and we don't forgive people, that our not forgiving people punishes us. It's like drinking poison and expecting someone else to die. I got to be honest with you. 15 years ago when I went through all that for that whole decade, and it was difficult and painful, still is, to be honest with you, sometimes. A little difficult to think that people intentionally said things about me that hurt me, hurt my character, hurt my friendships. They undermined relationships, that people intentionally went out of their way to do me harm. That still to this day bothers me. But I got to recognize something. That when I'm holding them in what I think is a prison of bitterness, see, I took those people and I feel like I put them into a cell and I locked the door. I felt like I was locking them in the prison of bitterness, but what I was really doing was handcuffing them to me. I wasn't putting them in a prison of bitterness. I was handcuffing them to me and making their story always a part of my story. And that's exactly what Jesus is saying. That he's not threatening to punish me if I don't forgive. He's telling me of the reality that holding them in my bitterness is torturing me. It's torturing me. Can I just say this to you? If you've got someone who hurt you, and here's the deal, we all do. We all have someone who's caused us pain, dealt a difficult and painful blow to us, betrayed us in bitter ways that are so deeply painful. Your holding on to unforgiveness keeps God from being able to punish. Your holding on to bitterness keeps God from being able to vindicate. You're holding on to the negative thoughts, the vindication, the retribution, keeps God from being able to do that. Can I just say this? Release them. Not because they're not guilty. They certainly are, in all likelihood. Release them, not because they deserve it. They certainly don't. Release them because you've been released.